introductions. Hello, my name is Emily. I'm going to be your chair today. Let's have the panel introduce themselves and right to left.
Hi, I'm Kaylani. Say them pronouns inside for now.
Hi, I'm Kate.
Hi, Audrey. Your pronouns. The law. Location or preference. The law. Libby should be there.
Excellent. Let's have the team now introduce themselves, starting with opening government.
My name is Matt. I'm speaking pronouns. I go to Yale. Thank you.
My name is David, even pronouns.
Opening opposition.
Ram 7, even.
Closing government.
Speaking first is Rita. She pronouns.
Speaking second, Matt.
Closing opposition.
And speaking second, Veda.
Great. Without further ado, on the motion, this House believes that newly established developing nations should strive to establish yaan-teh as a cultural foundation of their nations. Prime Minister, whenever you're ready.
Hi, can you hear me?
No, one more.
This good?
Yes.
Awesome. There is a plague that affects many people across the world. It is the success culture that tells us that we are not enough, we're not earning more money tomorrow than we are today. It tells us that if we are not as good as our peers or better, we are not doing well enough. That if we are living a good life but not an excellent one, we could be doing more. And that we should always be thinking about what tomorrow looks like in comparison to yesterday's that were forward. We are against this success culture. We are in favor of a culture of community, of equality, of believing that you should get along with your neighbor, and that you should try to work with your neighbor to come to common solutions in your problems. We think that this motion implies that we will have good faith effort on the behalf of the new government setting up this state. We think that this new government may be imperfect in many cases, but it will have cultural and governmental buy-in. We think that the population wants something to believe, and when we support the idea of egalitarianism, of community, of saying that we are a people that succeeded not because there was a small group of revolutionaries that created this state or a small group of people who funded the creation of this government, but because we are a community of people that are strong, that work together, that have many people that work hard, yes, there are no people that are better than anyone else within that society. We think that that's a beautiful thing that people will want to believe. The second thing that we say here is that the government has large-scale buy-in. Why? Because they were the ones that created this new state. People are here often by choice, and to the extent that they are not, we think that they are also not on their side of the house. But people do want to believe in a system that will build a better life for their children. So even if they have disagreements with what the government is saying right now, they want to buy into the culture so that they and their children can live lives in harmony with the rest of society. The third thing to point out is that we have a chance to build things like educational institutions, national traditions, etc., to groups of people who may not have had exposure to things like structured education, national traditions in this way in a long time, and will want to buy into these things. The final thing is just discussing why culture matters in people's individual decisions. The first reason is because the way people are raised defines their incentives. It is not just that people are good people up until a certain point, they become very selfish once they're the CEO of Apple. No, it is because they are told from a very young age, through things like advertisements, through things like government policies that are set up in ways that tax people differently, through things like education, through things like the stories that we communicate to our children about who is the type of person we should look up to. Not the humble person working next to us, not our neighbor that is a good family person, but instead, the people at the top of companies, the people that are delivering the most results, the people who we see on screen the most. We think that that type of culture makes you want to be like that. We think that type of culture turns the desire that some people have to create a good life for their families and themselves, and turns it into a desire to make the best life, to think that, oh, well, if I'm not comparing myself better to other people, then I am failing. When we put up lists of people and say that some people are better than others, you're naturally going to feel incentive to compete. Okay, the second thing, the final thing that I want to note here, is that people care about this even if they don't care individually, because they care about shame. Even the wealthiest person in the world wants to fit in. They want the wide majority of people to like them. They don't want to be booed when they go to public events. They want people to want to hang out with them. They want to be able to get into the cool parties, as they say. And as a result, you want people to believe that you are buying into the general national culture and not being an asshole. I think that's much more likely on their side of the house. Before I move on, any of you ask a question?
Solidarity is something that
where we are telling everyone that it is okay to be okay, that it is okay to be an average person and you don't need to be the absolute best. When you are going to school, when you are working, when you are engaging in average life, you don't need to be top of the world. But secondly, I think that you don't believe people who try to convince you that you need to get ahead in capitalist terms. We don't lionize people at the tops of companies. As a result, we are less likely to take advice from those people and take messages from those people that say, oh, well, everyone else didn't work hard enough. Everyone else was simply failing. And as a result, people are less likely to receive shame for not succeeding enough, for being in personally poor conditions. They're likely to receive more personal support from other individuals in forms of economic support, but also sympathy from the person next to you. When you're going through a hard time, you're more likely to get in here. Because again, it's not your fault for not being enough. You are just trying to live a good life, and we are all trying to support each other as a community. Opening?
People will have to work hard on either side of the house because they're poorer states. Hard American allows them to benefit from it because they feel good by working hard for their own benefit.
Yeah, people in China really love studying for years, back-breaking work so that they can take the Gaokao. Their parents love never seeing their children so that they can just send their kid to a really expensive tutoring center. We think that you create systems that are more expensive to engage in, more difficult to engage in, because everyone is working in an attempt to outcompete each other, not in an attempt to distribute the wealth more equally. Okay, on the government. Number one, they create more strongman culture. Why is that the alternative? Because strongman capture is likely in a world where the government needs to justify itself, not by saying that we are a great community of people, but by saying that we are individually great leaders that you should trust. When you have those strongmen at the top of the system, they say that they rule because they succeeded. They say that they rule because they are good people. They are more likely to try to shut down other individuals. They are more likely to try, for instance, under their side of the house, to achieve a best life for themselves, not necessarily for other individuals. And that's what leads to the aggression when the military leaders that led a revolution or the individuals at the top of the political system lose sight of what is good for the average person. Number two, the personal psychology of leaders in general. In order to win in the system under their side of the house, you have to be ambitious. Because there's no shame for being ambitious, but there are also people that won't necessarily vote for you if you aren't actively out there campaigning for yourselves. If we shame people for trying to become the best, the biggest politician, the businessman who's jumping in and has a lot of power, we will say that it's good to have humble public servants, and we are less likely to have leaders that are selfish and do things like embezzlement. Number three, aggression against others under their side of the house. Again, because it's based in things like resource trade-offs where we say, okay, look, we can either all be okay, not really wealthy, but okay, or this group of people can have all the oil in the country, which is what we see in places like Nigeria. Number four, cooperation with international trade organizations is better, and we are saying that we don't need to be fabulously wealthy, we don't need to be outcompeting our neighbors, we can work with them. Finally, on the economy. For one, corporations are likely to price more fairly because it's seen as greedy if they do not do so. When early corporations start up, MNCs come in, they will reject them if they price unfairly. Number two, corruption checks. We say that people are less likely to steal money if they're actively shaming work all the time, and they are told they're getting a worse life for their family. Thirdly, tax policy, legislation, personal incentives for tax evasion, corporate behavior, all change on the far side of the house. What's the importance? The government can't tax people, can't provide services. State failure is more likely. But also, every person in poverty has costs to the state. They're not consuming, they're taking up resources, and poverty is despicable. For all of these reasons, so proud of us.
For this fine remarks, leader of opposition.
Closer?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, is this like really excessive? Like, is this close? Is that good?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Let me just read those papers. Start. We can start off with some thinking on what our narrative is in the here. I think, yes, you can be more individualistic and more ambitious, and this is what happens if you go to the narrative that deliberately exists to suppress that insofar as people have natural instincts to do well for themselves. And I want to note here that those other narratives are different than the scale of ambition stuff that opening government talks about. Insofar as there's nothing maybe I can be really ambitious to go to college and nobody in my family has, but I'm probably not going to be president of my country. Those are the things that people focus on when they're like constructing their ambitions. On responses to opening up, just two things. One is just the response to the POI is a scandal. People need to work hard on either side if they're near to the right. If you say your kids pressure you and you need money, then the best thing is for people to be able to derive meaning from that, insofar as it doesn't feel as bad. Because if China actually still outcompetes the West, they still need people to study hard, but the meaningful difference is when you think it's completely pointless because it doesn't feel like there's any personal investment for you. The second thing is when they see there's more support from others. I start right here. If you're all deeply poor and you're in developing nations, then it is much better for you to be ambitious insofar as short term, you often don't have the resources to meaningfully take care of each other, so you need to develop those resources long term by gaining more stuff than what you have. Okay, first argument on success. Why is the ordinary, which is what they have to defend, very bad in these nations? Because it is a deeply regressive norm. What they're adhering to. Two reasons. One, they lack an experience with certain kinds of development. So often things like school and college are not as common insofar as you haven't had the time to develop those institutions. There's also a deep fear of risk around those weird things because you're not sure whether the investment will pay off, right? Is the money worth it if nobody in my family has gotten that education before? But second, standards can often devolve because you often have conflicts around the establishment of the nation, which is where these new states are. So the chaos around that means that the normal becomes a much lower level because of the lack of resources that people have. Why is it impossible for you to aim to succeed on behalf of society? Four things. One, it is deeply less proximate, right? You are not sure to what degree society is going to improve, and it is often not directly around you. So the nation is not as proximate as your intuitive tie to yourself. You are in your own head. You experience all of your own struggles. Those are the main things that people think about. But second, there's a collective action problem because there are costs to you as you frame. So when you want to do these things, often if you are waiting for society to improve, and that's why you're being ambitious, then you wait for other people to do it because you don't want to be the one to take the risk. Whereas if you're doing it for yourself, everybody has an incentive to be personally ambitious, take those risks, make those investments. Third, division, right? Even within their own communities, often when we're establishing a new country, there are people who have fought for independence in more radical ways. There are people who are more conservative or less conservative. There are a lot of divisions in these communities. At the point where that exists, often people don't want to do well for their community. So maybe you want to do well for your kid, but you don't want to do well for everybody else around you. Insofar as you disagree with a lot of them on key moral points. That is not true of yourself individually. You don't have that kind of division. It is very easy for you to make those choices. The fourth thing is just uncertainty, right? It's very unclear whether in any of these communities things will get better. That is even true of the life of your kids, right? When you see this level of devastation, there often follows conflicts that create within nations. It's very difficult to imagine that in the future, 50 years down the line, things are going to be better for that person. But what's very easy to understand and what has absolute certainty is that I can make things better for me right now if I try. Maybe the government will be bad going forward, maybe things won't be durable, but I can do things right now. Why can you also not succeed for personal well-being as opposed to just ambition? Three things here. One, these are often higher order things, right? So you could, if you just wanted to survive and not just be ambitious, also survive as like a cow farmer. But for you to do things like say, no, I need to get a better education, I need to get out of this country, make more money and save it for my kids. Those are things where you need a greater degree of ambition. Second, there are often norms that says this stuff is bad, right? When you have traditional societies or traditional norms around the kind of lives people are supposed to live, I think often they directly condemn those things that make you succeed more insofar as that's the narrative they're defending. The third thing is just it's often not profitable right now. So if you want to do something like have innovation and science in your country, those are not things that are going to make you money today, but those are things that yield amazing returns in the long run, so you need to have some kind of longer-term ambition rather than just right now wanting to survive. I think the impact is pretty clear here. We get, first of all, just more successful individuals because we break the series of problems that we talk about and we make people's lives better. But second, we get better countries. At the point where you have more innovation, right? More people who want to go to school, get that education in science, be those next pioneers of development in their country. Third, I think we get better institutions. The fact that there are more people who can buy into this, because you don't have to depend on specific people who are altruistic for their kids or their community, also means you can develop generally better institutions, right? Like schools for more people.
Some people can think that it's inspiring and they can make their lives better, but the problem is that it's zero-sum. Not everyone can be relatively better than everybody else. This narrative breaks down after the first
That's really untrue, right? Like everybody in your country could get a high school education and you'd be better off. This is true in like most countries in the world. The second argument we'll make then is on conforming. The notion isn't just about ambition. Why is this narrative selectively applied? Two things. One, you often want to enforce your own culture insofar as there is a dominant majority that believes the way they do things is good. But second, politics at the point where you are also the majority that like runs the country. I think the counterfactual is a lot better in 3 ways. One, you have a lack of a common areas, you can go to other areas. So maybe some areas are religiously conservative, like rural areas, but you can go to urban areas and live your life there because not everybody buys into this. And the second thing is you have modernization areas. So you can say, look, maybe the West is abnormal, but living that way of life is good, so it's acceptable. Third, it's just not following your culture is okay, right? You are allowed to do these things insofar as you believe that even if you break with those, being abnormal is not in and of itself a sin, even if as long as you can justify that it is an objectively good choice to make. The effect of this is you avoid systematically depriving minorities, right? Like denying them rights, basic things like that. But second, you avoid blaming minorities for the lack of progress by saying their abnormality is the reason why society is bad, or creating learned helplessness when they see others succeed and think it's their identity that's hurting them or their personal ambition, even if they had to do those things to survive. The third thing, lastly, is just why is this more unifying? I think the counterfactual is better for 3 reasons. One, it requires less punitive measures. If you do individualism badly, maybe people fail. But if you do shaming badly, you have to actively oppress people, right? You create conflict because you have to punish those people with shaming, which means you get long-term rejection of the narratives that open up talks about. But second, you get more shared resources, right? Because you all have common people across different groups in the country. They can all do this stuff, all collaborate. So you get common resources for like aspiring scientists, economists, versus focusing on groups where those groups don't necessarily have incentives to collaborate or actively. Very proud to those.
Speaker for their fine remarks, CPM.
By definition, most people are average, and no amount of playing around with words from either of these opposition teams is going to change the fact that when you have a narrative that tells you that you need to be above average, you need to be extraordinary, most people will fail to fulfill the social expectation to be extraordinary, and they will be sad. That is a very simple but compelling case that we bring you on opening government. I want to have 2 points of strategy before I get into the rest of this debate, which is first, that people are unlikely to get lazy and neglect their basic necessities as the opening government team claims. The reason why is that Jante discourages and stigmatizes ambition, which is the striving for something which is far above what is normal to expect of an individual. I want to point out that it is normal, generally socially regarded, to expect to have a good life, a roof over your head, to have food on your table. I want to point out, moreover, that the normal is not merely the average, right? Even people in war-zone, war-torn countries where the average person is desperately poor would say that this is not the normal way for humans to live. Normalcy as a concept is typically somewhere in between like the best possible thing and the average possible thing. This is shown by cognitive science and read Josh to the class comments. I want to point out that when Obo says that all those people need to be lifted from extreme poverty, clearly the Jante narrative will not discourage them from doing the things that they need to do to lift them out of extreme poverty. But I would moreover note that the more that people are suffering, the less they care about fulfilling social norms, and the more they are willing to say, if I am suffering so terribly, I'm willing to break a social norm if that means I can put food on the table, because the relative harm of starvation is worse than the relative harm of being stigmatized. So the worse off people are, the more greedy they get until they get to a normal level, which beats a lot of the material opening government. The second thing I want to point out is that the counterfactual is a brutal rat race narrative where you have to be on top, as Matt says, and not the friendly capitalist. It would be nice to be ordinary, extraordinary, but like not really that opening opposition wants to point out. The reason why is, first, ambition is by definition defined in terms of being above the ordinary or average. But the second thing that I want to point out is that wealthy individuals with economic, every wealthy individual has economic power, but wealthy individuals who have the ability to shape social narrative by virtue of their owning of the media, their disproportionate representation in education ministries and government services, are likely to want to spread a narrative which valorizes wealth, which says that wealth is earned shames them from doing so. But when Jante is already established, they cannot push that narrative because people, as they are perceived, because that is seen as bragging, which is already socially stigmatized. I want to point out that the average person always feels that they can be better than average. They always benchmark against the people around them, so there's a constant race to the top. I want to push forward a new contribution on the degree of egalitarian politics and how new states likely to have high degrees of inequality by virtue of low levels of development. There are lots of resource-rich new states that are established, states with vast amounts of low levels of modernization, but with vast amounts of natural resources that can be extracted. I think there is a greater willingness to tax and redistribute these resources on the narrative when it is good to be extraordinary. There is a social narrative that those who own and control those resources deserve those resources, that it is desirable to be like that. This is why we have this saying in America that there are no poor people, just temporarily embarrassed millionaires. Because poor people in America, because of this narrative, do not strive to be collectively improved, but rather to be the ones that get up, as opposed to a narrative that says that we're more willing to tax wealthy people in order to run collectively good things. This is both because there's a desire to get everybody to a normal level, but second, because there are independent electoral incentives to do things that are good for poor people who comprise the vast majority of the population. And when there is additionally a narrative that says it's okay to tax wealthy people because they don't deserve their wealth, or because it is socially bad to be wealthy, there's a far greater willingness to engage in that. I want you to compare this, and this is the second class here, about individual people, about their mechanism, which is people will pull each other up by their bootstraps. God, this feels like the world's most round. I want to point out that mathematical people are deeply unhappy in the status quo by virtue of the rat race. They don't respond to this. I think the deep level of psychic harm that is experienced by every individual in this debate is worth weighing. Mental health and depression has severe harms on your health. It can decrease your life expectancy by years. It can make it harder for you to form other relationships. It's harder to form friendships when you feel you are in constant competition with other people. This is a level of misery that we not want to inflict on most people, and it is in and of itself the most important thing in this debate. Opening opposition tells us that people need to aspire to be better. I would point out that even if they prove that on their side people aspire, they don't actually demonstrate that they're likely to succeed in the things that they aspire to do. So yes, if I'm a cow farmer, I might aspire to go to university. They don't give you a mechanism by which you're likely to be able to do that, right? I would argue that in newly developed states, with a lack of infrastructure resources where most people are poor, it is very difficult to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Which is why the most successful development stories in history are not those of individual people pulling them. Like, it's not like Singaporeans are like harder working than, than people who come from like Namibia. It's that they have a government that is better able to provide services to make it easier for everybody to attain normalcy. And that is what happens on our side. So the way in here is we provide a capacity to pull yourself up. They prove an incentive, but no capacity. I want to then point out their claim, which is about how this narrative is worse for non-conforming individuals, whether that's minority groups or if they make this argument, and maybe CO will make this argument about like homosexuals, people like gay people, people like that. I want to point out there are three reasons why this does not stand. The first thing is that on either side, people who are socially unconforming are likely to be shamed, because people are generally shamed for deviating from any social norm. Perhaps on their side there's more tolerance of eccentricity, like people who dress weird, but not a violation of deep social norms like taboo against some sort of like person in certain genital, like acting in a certain way, right? So it's not comparative. I would second point out that Jante does not imply that norms should be unchanging. It merely says that it's good to conform and bad to be extraordinary. It doesn't say that you should change social norms if they are bad. I see no reason why social movements cannot form to argue that certain social norms prevent normal people from achieving a normal life. I would moreover point out that people, when who advocate for changes in social norms, who are generally more conformist and appear to be more ordinary to the normal people, are more persuasive. So if you are, for instance, somebody who is advocating for gay rights, but you will not act in particularly non-conforming ways in other ways, you're more likely to be taken seriously by people, and just as a matter of fact, people's biases, which makes these movements more effective, which flips a lot of that. I think we're very proud to stand in the opening government.
Interpreters, final remarks. Deal out.
Okay, this is good. Yeah.
I think the big clash in this debate is whether or not this narrative will be like zero sum or not. And I don't think it will be zero sum because our narrative isn't going to look like telling people to outwork your peers, but telling people to be a doctor to help your community or go to college to help your community. And this is where I get the crux of my contribution as a deputy. I think a lot of Law of Jante says that there's no capacity for you to improve. Here is proof that you can go up the social ladder without harming everyone else, proving that this is not actually zero sum. There are 4 reasons why this is true. Number 1, if you're a newly developed state, you have large spare capacity because the existing thing is that not a lot of people go to college. So when you do end up going to college, you don't like decrease acceptance rates from everyone else. It's ours, college is looking for more people to go in. So it's not necessarily zero sum for people to actually enter. Number 2, you get a large inflow of funds the moment you develop because corporations see this as an opportunity to invest. So you oftentimes get massive amounts of jobs available for people to access, which is why because they want to make a first mover's advantage and gain access to that as an individual. Which is why even if you get that job, there are many existing opportunities which do not make it zero sum on the north side of the house. Number 3, there are also existing notions of solidarity. So the way people approach this isn't as bad as they say. Because if you've gone through conflict, poverty as a nation, you probably have built strong communal ties because the only way to survive that is surviving together. This means that your notion of working and succeeding is probably helping out another member of your community succeed and get to college, which means that the incentive of people to carry this out is positive on our side of the house. The 4th thing I want to do is that this incentivizes governments to actively create the opportunities. Because if the narrative they're founding their vision on is you need to succeed, they're held to that standard. Their legitimacy as a government is held to the standard of how well people are able to meet that goal. This means that you necessarily have to create the opportunities we are talking about on our side of the house. So not only do you have the capacity to do this, you also have the active incentive to do this as a government. That practically takes up the majority of knowledge because it's not zero sum. A lot of these places, the standard is super low, and a lot of times this is the necessary thing to push people to take advantage of those opportunities and actually become ambitious. Let's then proceed directly for a bubble. So thank you for closing apply. Oh, firstly, I think it's the battle cry of government. They say people are ostracized by this because most people are average. I have, quite frankly speaking, 5 responses to this. Number 1, Eli responds to this already. He tells you the standard for average is oftentimes very low. So oftentimes you can actually do have the capacity to meet this. That's to say, if the average like when we do things that are extraordinary, we're not telling you to be president of your country. It's a person who's gone through conflict. Your expectations on life are low. You probably do things like going to college to help your family members, which are reasonable for most people to actually accept. But notice, governments have incentive to do this because obviously if they give you a bad narrative and an unrealistic one, then there's zero buy-in. So you want to make this as reasonable as possible so that it's effective for people to actually accept and believe. The second thing I want to talk about is just like the margin of this is small. If you're literally suffering from poverty and you've gone through conflict, you've probably developed psychological mechanisms that allow you to cope with the worst form of harms, like for example self-comparison. But do you not know what you don't have like coping mechanisms for? Like sheer poverty and not having the ability to uplift yourself. So at best, they prove that people are sad. Our comparison is literally people are starving and do not have access to existing opportunities they get. I'm not sure why this is a big part. But number 3, I'm not sure why this narrative can be done for other people. So maybe if I'm a father and I don't think I can succeed, I can hope for the best for my children and find that reasonable hopes of success and healing and positive fulfillment from them. This is what the majority of developing countries do. This is why many people immigrate, and even if it makes their lives worse, if it makes their lives better for the children, and they get a sense of happiness that actually does that. The 4th thing I want to note on this clash is that even if we don't succeed, we shift the overturn window on our side of the house. So maybe you don't get, like for example, a full college degree, but now you finish high school. But now, for example, take steps and actively improve your life and actively go to the market. This means that at best, you need to massive social economic improvements on our side of the house, and at best, their kids only that people don't feel as good. I'm not sure what is a big part, but you've gone through other things that are much more traumatic to you as an individual. That is what's missing of their argument. This is in occurring like US and Canada. It's occurring in poorer states in general.
If I'm sold on a promise that my life can be great and our country's life can be great, and that lofty expectation that governments have an incentive to promote isn't met, how do I feel politically?
No, the problem with that case, first is the premise of it. Like, the narrative isn't that you can be president. It's not super lofty. It's probably very reasonable and localized. It's of course that is the only way in which you're able to get buy-in. But secondly, we told you that even if you, like at best, it's still a psychological part, right? Maybe you don't feel as good, but the develop the ways to cope with it naturally. That probably takes up a lot of that argument already, like a lot of this, I don't know, like coping mechanism argument that they talk about. I will then move on to the rest of the case that they say. So the second argument that comes out from Prime Minister is to say, corporations will now price things more lowly because, they want to be like complementarian. This is just untrue for two reasons. Number one, most corporations that enter aren't part of this narrative. Oftentimes they're outside, they're entering from other countries. So they're not communitarian by nature. They're also profit maximizing agents who want to make money from these types of groups. Because if you're fresh from conflict, I'm unsure why you have local industries. The industries that are coming in are probably going to be foreign. So I'm unsure why they believe the narrative was most likely not. They buy into capitalistic narratives and still tell them to make as much money as possible. The second thing I want to note here is that it's actually good if companies themselves are utilitarian, right? Because how you do things is become more profit maximizing. You take advantage, you take certain risks allow you to go to poorer areas. So you have first movers advantage because you want to be able to make sure you succeed. It is a risk-taking element that is inherent to ambition that also take advantage of all the benefits that we talk about on our side of the house. At the end of the day, what we like to see is every single thing in the scheme. Because what you have to understand is that the norm you're striving for, what is the norm of expectation of life, is so comparatively low that you need to tell these people to individually succeed. Not just to make lives better for their own family members, but to help the rest of their countrymen live all of these things. And how does this outweigh everything else? I think this physical benefit is number one on magnitude much bigger. Because you have future generations of your family and everyone else that comes after you. So maybe you feel sad for one generation on their side. You make life better for future generations on our side of the house. But secondly, just on magnitude. We have a greater sheer amount of people because literally, we just help, vast majority of people get out of current conditions that they're in. Very proud to oppose.
So we're going to go like that.
Member of government. Whenever you're ready.
Is this good? Like a good
That's
value?
good.
Okay. I feel like there is a reason that the countries that have come from terrible situations and build them up into developed economies like South Korea tend to be highly conformist societies. That people are told from young age they have to get an education, they have to start a family, they're going to have to work really, really hard at jobs that probably aren't super great, and incrementally the next generation will might be a little bit better. That's the only way we can end up in a place that the country has to be. This is absolutely necessary for the prospering of a nation, the prospering of an economy, and a stable government. We are going to explain how it's exclusive to our side and can achieve these impacts. But firstly, just to those who like, do we have the ability to do this? What is the norm of this thing? I think it is, unfair opening opposition with pride, but we cannot also establish what the norm is in this narrative. Obviously, when you spread this narrative through schools, through songs, cultural values, we're going to be inculcating what the average looks like, what the norm looks like within this. And that looks like, for example, even if it's not super ambitious, like working really, really hard, it's like the norm, like the average industrious person. Making, for example, starting a family, having stable family units in your country, be part of the norm. We don't understand that's different. Opening opposition concedes that norms can clearly shift over time if necessary, and you can adapt norms to different localized areas. I don't think that this model that actually exists in this city or matters. Okay, now I'm going to talk about what are the biggest threats to you as a newly established country. And that's probably two things. One, two things like, divide and conquer colonial policies, the fact that you probably have different kinds of people within your nation, then ethnic, religious, racial rights, meaning you're at risk of things like civil wars and coups, depending on how that plays out. I think the second thing is that strong government is not established. That strong men seize power and they inculcate corruption and poor governance in your nation. How do we fix this? Open government tells us that this rhetoric because they think that only people should be exceptional, that people have to work really hard, that they have to do all these things in order to be considered valuable people, in order to be considered parts of your community. I think that it's incredibly detrimental, the kinds of rhetoric that community leaders can get away with, the kinds of anger and violence they can foment. When you take this away, when you have the government actively telling people, actually it's okay if you're not doing the most for your community, it's okay to just be average, it's okay to just exist. I think that takes a lot of the power out of these ideas. The second thing that I want to talk about is political elections and how this changes the exact kind of rhetoric that people can do. The problem with these fragile countries, which are often new democracies where there's a popular new leader who promises election or could take it away any minute, is that they often use the idea of ambitious rhetoric and the fact that people want to be rich, they're not okay with their everyday life, that they want these big things, that they want to be a doctor, they want to have a huge house, they want to be a millionaire, to promise things. They say that the government's basis of legitimacy is promising these things, is promising these people that they can have this quality of life. But the fact is that justifies the terrible policies that often take place in order to do this. If the government says, we are going to print tons of money so that we can have a better economy, so that we can give it out and you're going to be rich. If the government says that if we implement super harsh tariffs and don't allow these foreign companies to interfere with us, you are going to be rich, you're going to be prosperous. People fall for that because what they care about is becoming rich, is that they care about this idea. They need to strive, but they need to be ambitious, they need to be better. I think that what changes in our certain house is that people are less likely to think this is a good thing. They're going to be thinking, why should we be spending all of this money to make this incredible? But that's probably not what we exactly want on our side of the house. What people are more likely to want is things that sustain this law, things that sustain and make it easier to work hard. They're probably going to want more practical things, again, like educational policies, things like that. The most important thing that I want to highlight here is that when you enable the government to do these kinds of poor economic behavior, when you enable them, for example, to print tons of money, or when you enable them to have harsh policies that cut off your economy from the rest of the world, that is exactly how these governments inculcate themselves. They take that money and they use it to pay off politicians to be on that side. They take off that money and turn it into a system of cronyism where they give it to their friends and family. They use these policies to benefit the companies that are close to them. It is only when these governments can convince the populace in the first place, which they often can because they're new country, they're a new leader, they're promising all these things to the people that the opening government tells you about. It is when the people buy it, they're actually able to get away with these policies. And it is when there's not the required backlash, when there is the justification of these things happen. Before I keep continue, I'll think about it for a moment.
Yeah, groups use social conformity to oppress others per our argument. So if you want to avoid divided groups attacking each other, you need to give them a reason why they can individually succeed, rather than thinking we need to create conformity which will necessarily suppress major parts of the country.
The standards of conformity that we talk about are probably going to be things that all people can strive towards, but governments know that it's not going to play out in parts of the country that are probably quite important. B, as we've been describing roads, each of these norms can obviously be changed and shifted depending on the area and who lives there. I think that's quite reasonable. But C, I think you've done no work on your side to explain why groups don't just do racism and do things that make their own group better. On your side, it's not really clear what the difference is this big. But I want to talk to you about why this is so important, because this is exactly what facilitates the rise of politicians like Trump, like all the other journalists surrounding in the world. Because they tell people, you're just working a factory job. They're like, what you want is to be like me. You want to be a billionaire. You want to be, you want to be someone who's incredibly prosperous. And I'm going to hear that too. People hear that promise, and they're not naturally suspicious of it. What happens in our society is they become naturally suspicious. Why is this so important? You cannot have innovation if you do not have a strongly educated population. You cannot have a strongly educated population if you do not have good government which enables those institutions. This is why, for example, that countries like South Korea, for example, which have very controlling governments for sure, very, societies, conformist societies with sort of their rule, can eventually develop, eventually create new norms, and eventually become freer because of the fact that they're able to have a strong population that is educated, that has money, that is able to work those hard factory jobs, which they, yes, might have to work, that are able to do very, very hard things, like send your children to school when you're not sure that actually is going to pay off for your family in the long run, because you think that that is the norm that you're supposed to be following. I think that what this means is that you're far more likely to have a stable society in the long term, and this is going to be the most important thing for individuals' well-being, is to ensure that you have a government that is protective of institutions, is going to be setting up reasonable policy, common sense policy, and so that we're selling the country a dream that is
I want to remind everyone at the start of this speech that this is a newly established developing country. What that means is that you have to ask yourself the following question. Where are your schools? Do businesses actually even get subsidized or controlled by the state instead? These types of policy decisions are really important, and the lie of CG is you just set up institutions in the right way and people get to access them as a result. We support people like on the south side, for example, being able to access education and us lauding that and saying that is incredible and something that we should look up to. The problem in this round is that the government narrative is one that gives states the power to hold you down. It is the worst type of oppression because it is unseen, it is uncriticized, and as such, it degrades you forever. The first thing I want to observe is the counterfactual narrative that we get Xiao-ke to set up before getting into the extension on why we think we uniquely can achieve real forms of development for people that opening opposition fails to prove. So, what is the counterfactual narrative? So, I want to show the start here that when individuals succeed, this is precisely not zero-sum. It is portrayed as a victory for an oppressed people that are being able to show that elements of them have succeeded and therefore you too. This is, for example, at a very relatable level, like Bangladesh and the Philippines celebrating intensely when their countries won WBC for the first time. This is celebrated as victories for the entire nation and things that people get really, really excited about. And there are two reasons. First, it gives people hope. It gives them the promise that they too can escape the suffering. And second of all, there's affinity, a feeling of proximity that this is possible because you are in similar communities, that you look like them, that it is possible for you too. This is directly tied to narratives of solidarity, celebrating that oppression doesn't define your future and that personal achievement is inspiring. Before getting right into the extension, I just want to make a couple of observations about the closing down case, which I do think is missing a huge analytical gap, which is why these institutions are developed in a good way in the first place. But the thing is, it's just important to note that on opposition, we do have counter-beyond. It is that this House believes that should motion, which per your WBC handbook, means that we do get the opportunity to say, there are other narratives that we support. Things like solidarity between people, things like celebrating personal achievement and the idea that, for example, everyone has an unlimited potential and we should invest into that, for example. So that being said, I do want to get into the development extension, and it's because that's just going to clash with closing government really perfectly, direct responses isn't necessary. Okay, the first part of this extension is to explain why it's the case that development actually works. Now, the mechanism that you often opening opposition is people innovate because, they're ambitious, so they just start spending their money that they have, and they do it in places that exist, very well-formed markets, and then those markets just let them create money, and then trickle-down economics just succeeds. This isn't enough because, again, these are newly established and, as a result, highly undeveloped states. What is the first thing to know? First, empirically, investment is happening now in a lot of these states because states end up deciding to do things like spend on education because there's a genuine belief, which is the result of these narratives, but also Western narratives, for example, that success can improve you and that the success of individuals within society ends up coming back. And in a lot of cases, it does, right? Remittances can be very, very valuable people, parts of individual economies. But second, there is a belief that we just should. And this is tied to the narrative of solidarity and the belief that people can succeed. The first thing is that we believe as individuals in the society that we have a right to access these things, that our potential ought to be spent on, and therefore we don't understand why when governments decide not to. But second, when people aren't performing to their potential because you believe that it is incredibly high. So it's not just that the farmer gets the farm, but we believe that there is better opportunities for them, and then the fact that that is based in or that they're not able to succeed or feed themselves in that role, that is something that is important. But third, it just means that people can specialize, and this gives people institutions which they can actually take advantage of. But the most important part of this then is to explain why it's the case that their side is actively horrible for allowing this economic development to occur. Note, these are newly established, so institutions are weak or absent, and this ends up lending itself to highly planned economies and highly planned states. Now, the first thing to note is that this narrative has to be disseminated from somewhere. No one has told you where. What is most likely? It is probably the people that have literally built the state, right? It is the strongest and most mobilized organization, the person that is currently heading the government. And that has two implications. One, it is probably a self-serving narrative at some level, that I am serving you, so I am good enough. So it fails to critique power in a lot of instances. But more than that, it just means that you as an individual are highly empowered to take advantage and to claim control over that, because you are the body that is supposed to represent these individuals, and you are disseminating the narrative. So what type of things end up happening? First, I think that you are highly motivated as a result of this narrative to control the excesses of people, because you believe that things need to be standardized in order to control for them. or you should punish people for having more wealth more accurately, then what that means is that you strengthen these narratives over time, and then when governments get elected, they run on doing things that we're going to crack down on wealth, we're going to crack down on the creation of opportunities, so these institutions get rolled back even if they do exist. Go.
If governments are bad, they also do the version of their solidarity narrative bad, which is that solidarity is with our people, our type of class, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so the problem is, this isn't like a solidarity, like our narrative isn't saying that it is bad to the extent where you say like people are worse or not. We're just taking the like natural but good form of your narrative, which is like wealth is bad, what the creation of wealth is undesirable. It's not like a misconstrual of you, it's just like applying this as a law or negative, whereas our application of solidarity just clearly ties to much more logical sense of economically developed points. Okay, why are bad states bad? One, states are often foolish. You don't have a lot of experience, you lack the expertise in early stages as well. So the types of economic and investment decisions that you end up making are really bad. That's where you get things like money printing or otherwise poor economic decisions, because you believe that you're in a position where like that is desirable and the spreading of that wealth instantly is the most important thing. Second, because they undermine market mechanisms that just naturally occur and are desirable towards spurring innovation in the first place. And I want to point out that this is especially common, because in a lot of cases, like even if the government isn't trying to do things wrong, they end up doing things wrong. But the problem is, it's very, very difficult to call this out, because who am I to say that the government is doing something wrong? Why should I take that stand? How can I take that stand? I'm just a nobody. But more than that, what about if you actually do bad? When things do go bad, the other problem is that people don't actually have a belief that things can ever get better, because this feels equal. This is what equality looks like. Everyone is at the same standard. So even if that standard is awful, there's no push for it to ever improve, even in the form of an egalitarian system. Why is that?
Opposed.
I think that's speaker for this final part. Go for it.
Can everyone do the records? Is it actually science? Better? Better? Cool. Growing an economy from scratch is very difficult and unpleasant. The missing response to Rita at all of the most important part of the extension goes like this. The mean worker in this country for the next 50 years is going to be a cog in a global machine. They're going to be working in a factory for a multinational company because we need foreign investment at CO3s. They're going to be working in service, they're going to be working in jobs that are generally not intrinsically satisfying in the sense that they know that they're on the top globally. Only one Bangladesh or Philippines can win worlds every single year, and the vast majority of developing countries are not going to have immediate fast roads to success economically. The average worker needs to work in a job that is not this. The average worker, because the education system in the country is relatively poor, relatively undeveloped, is not going to have an advanced degree. And they're going to know, no matter how much a government tries to convince them that things can be perfect in the future, that things aren't great right now. What tells people that they can be happy in the everyday, working a factory job, is the precise idea that they're not told to pin their success and status on reaching a particular outcome, which is A, impossible to quantify. How do people know that they're reaching out for success? How do they know that success is reached? They always feel that the government isn't doing the right job. They always feel that the institutions are insufficient, and they always feel that the government itself has failed them because they haven't reached the prescribed level of impact, because they're stuck on the economic treadmill. Opening government identifies this as a reason why people are unhappy when they're every day. We do two contributions. Number one, we explain the types of jobs and things that people need to do are such that they are forced to go through the which is small. But more relevantly, we explain how this manifests politically. We explain that the rise of Trump in the United States is because we have an overproduction of the problem. We have people getting fancy degrees across lives here, and poor places too, that are sold on a version of success. That you can be wealthy, that our country can be wealthy, and not everyone can. Some can, but necessarily not all, because it is a relative ranking of X, Y, and vice versa. The outcome that we get here is that people don't trust the state, they don't trust politics, because they were sold on a vision. Why the state have an opportunity or have a large incentive to sell them on a vision inappropriately? Opening law says that people are likely to afford a version of success that is plausible to them, but they ignore the fact that states have maximal incentives to overplay how high things can reach. Why? The country's a blank slate. There's no basis on which to form an expectation other than what the state feeds you. The state obviously has a very large incentive because they gain legitimacy from this. They are saying, grow very fast at it. You can have great jobs. Why would they have no promise? If they succeed, they're fine. And if they don't succeed, they expect that they can stay on politically because they make people happy with the norm and they already have power. Meaning that the average person is likely to be significantly more optimistic about the country's chance of development. And that would be fine in 5 years. But it's not fine later. Because when people perceive institutions as failing, or when they perceive their life as having failed, because the version of success that they were promised isn't there, they are far more likely on the demand side for a strong man to say, I want military rule, I want rule by my social group, because they don't perceive a sort of normal or secular way in which the country can develop and they can meet those expectations. They need someone to do it for them. They resented the country because they were sold on a vision of optimistic expectations that doesn't match the reality on the ground. They feel that they deserve these things, and that's the most important thing. The basis for doing extra legal action, for military coups, even just for people to, not pay their taxes or institutions to break down, isn't just that, they're not some sort of socialist in any sense. It's that they believe they were failing, they owed something. Because the white men in America think that they were owed status. That meant that they were voted against a country in which racial minorities were getting a lot of these positions. That is the most damaging version of the idea that you ought to be optimistic and stand out. That not everyone can, but they feel like they owe that, and they feel like they're likely to get it, and they don't. That creates a noxious, dangerous, populist politics. Of course, they might say we have communism. This is where I'll get to closing opposition. Before that, I'll take a look.
Yeah, well, under your narrative, the boss can tell his workers they don't deserve a raise because it's shameful to seek individual success. Both DLO and LO prove there's more support for development with 4 reasons CO misses, so there's no need for the seeking narrative.
Yeah, I think it's possible in some cases this narrative gets recognized, but equally, people believe that they should be at an average or reasonable standard. So yes, a company can say, you specifically don't deserve a raise, but people can say, I'm average, I deserve the basic standard that everyone else can afford. People who are underpaid are those people who get brought to that same standard. That is why I deserve some. In terms of closing opposition, they argue that this will likely lead to a more socialist planned economy for the reason that people buy into an idea that everyone should be exceptional. I can see that there probably will be more governmental involvement in the economy on both sides. The reason our extension is relevant is that it proves that people are structurally likely to elect a worse government in their world that is much more angry on method at a class level that is likely to pursue policies to get people who feel resentful that they haven't reached economic success into those laws. So what their extension has to do is to prove that there's such a large increase in the planning of the economy relative to our side that there are deleterious economic effects that are worse than people voting in bad economic policy from the government that is slightly less involved in the economy. Massive burden. But more relevantly, I just don't think it's likely to happen this way. They rely on a country that's likely to demonize the rich in a massive way, but I'm not sure that the government has an incentive to make this narrative play out when it says rich people, we hate you, or expropriate your property, go somewhere else. Why? Because they want their tax revenue. They want them to donate money to schools and foundations to help develop the country. And if you're a rich person, how do you respond to this narrative? Like, there are tons of rich people in Norway and Scandinavia, and they feel guilty about their wealth because this narrative helps to internalize that. And they give money away. They start foundations because they face external social pressure. The same logic applies here. Governments don't have an incentive to make the narrative apply in such a way that they chase away all the rich people because they need to collect revenue from taxation. They need rich people to run companies in order to build the economy. They know that their economic legitimacy is to an extent predicated on this. And the ability of a narrative to justify the existence of a government that is dependent on you being average and being okay with that depends on the government being able to make the average reasonably acceptable. Otherwise, people don't buy into it. Meaning that rather than chasing away rich people, the narrative is far more likely to extract more money from them in terms of their own decisions to want higher taxes, to donate much more money. Moreover, I think there's a worst case where the government gets slightly more planned. I'm just not sure that that's bad, because planned economy on its own isn't bad. I think it's irresponsible planning and zero sum. And most countries in the world are doing tons of industrial policy right now. Western states have the highest tariffs in the world, so it's not that reasonable for a developing country to want to put in some reasonable tariff barriers in order to compensate for that. The problem is when they do it in stupid ways, and we proved that they were much more likely to elect governments in the long run that do it in stupid ways, riding on waves of resentment and anger. Why does this extension move around? Even if opening opposition is right that some individuals are happier because they can tell themselves, I'm on path to success, this only works for a point, and it relies on people essentially lying to each other based on externally created social expectations about how likely it is that they succeed. This works in the short term, it doesn't work in the long run, and it reverses itself as waves of political anger happen. Look, the West did this model, the United States did this model. There's a wave of populism sweeping the West precisely because people perceive this model as having failed. This can build an institution tomorrow, but it cannot create a country where people are happy, because it is not possible for everyone to be above average, it's not possible for every country to be above average. People need to do the hard work that's involved in development, and we want them to be happier about it and more responsible about it. We're very happy with this.
Off with.
industrial policy, no matter what the norm is.
So this brings me on to the OJ